Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you on Monday, August 14th. And today, a quick video about how to decide for yourself, not take my opinion, but how to really go about thinking about whether Bitcoin is a bubble. If you've been following Bitcoin, you've seen it's been quite a stunning rise, really in the past month. The whole year in general, but looking at the chart back on July 16th, looks like it got down to 1800, around 1900 bucks. Today we crossed 4300, and it's happened pretty quickly because even as back far as August 4th, it was trading 2800, which was around that previous high from about 2 months back. So certainly exploding in price as it crossed. Again, I think it got as high as 4,300 when I looked earlier this morning. And a lot of people are wondering, well, is this a bubble? Is it going to collapse? Is this just the beginning of something bigger? And rather, I will share my opinion. I've bought a small amount of Bitcoin. I have 1.1 of them. That was, excuse me. I've actually been buying more Litecoin and a few of the other ones. Again, not a massive amount, but just diversifying some away from silver. Again, I'm, I guess, a hardcore silver fan at heart, although obviously we talk a lot about the manipulation in there and the things holding back silver from rising in price. So I wish I could sit here and tell you exactly whether Bitcoin's going to skyrocket from here or go lower. And I have my thoughts on that, but really what I think could be more helpful to you is just giving you a couple of the steps that I went through, and again, the type of thing that I did as a former trader, and the thinking and process that, again, maybe you'll have a different view on certain things than I do, but I think what can be really of use, again, is not to take my opinion or anybody else on YouTube or CNBC, but just get to that point where you can start figuring out how to figure something out in the financial markets, which certainly you can do. It's the opposite of what we've been trained in this society to do, where we figure we have to just hand someone our money, hope for the best, which, as we've seen from Wall Street and a lot of these bubbles, doesn't always work out so well. So anyway, I got four things that I think would at least give you the framework here for going about how to start forming your own opinion on it. I'm sure you've already done that to some degree, but we'll introduce these and maybe that'll help you add to that along. The first is just wondering if you already understand Bitcoin. Again, keep in mind that Bitcoin is still, to most people, an incredibly new concept. I would guess there's still a large percentage of people that have never even heard the word Bitcoin, let alone thought about it, let alone own one, let alone understand how it works. I was fortunate to be familiar with Bitcoin. I guess it's at least probably shortly after it was launched. Maybe let's say 2000, so at least by 2011, maybe 2010, but at least by 2011, 2012. And part of the reason I became familiar with it was a lot of the folks that fall into that libertarian / gold and silver crowd were also big supporters of Bitcoin. Now, I spent most of my time focusing on silver and the precious metals, although I want to be careful how I phrase this. I think there's a balance between you want to go and do your own homework and research and form your own opinions, and that's an important step. Also, you do want to get information from other people, maybe not just, there might be some people in your life that they say something and you trust them so well that they say you don't need to ask further questions and you just say, the guy knows his stuff, I'm acting on that. And I think that's valid, not in every circumstance, but you have that. Then you have people who might be knowledgeable about something, and when they say it, you think, all right, this guy has some good points. Want to go home and research that. Hopefully, I fit into that category for you. But I mean, it's kind of balancing because you can say, all right, I'm not going to take anyone else's opinion. I'm going to do everything alone, although that limits kind of what you can get done. And you see people have a good network of people, intelligent people that they trust and can talk to and get information from. Really expands what you can do. So the one thing that's always stood out to me about the Bitcoin folks is that every person I've ever talked to who actually really understands it or has a background in coding and really gets it, they're almost fanatical about it. Now, could they be wrong? Sure. Again, just introducing that as a data point that, again, for me, digging into the silver thing, which is not the easiest thing for people who haven't maybe have a background in this to really understand. There's a lot of complex parts. So in general, when I hear someone who looks at all the stuff that's gone on Wall Street for decades and has arrived at that conclusion and is seeing the same thing in the silver market as I do, catches my attention. And again, most of the people I've found who get that, and if they happen to be knowledgeable about Bitcoin, they're usually hardcore advocates about it. Excuse me. One of the things that you'll also notice, or maybe you'll notice, I've noticed this lately, a lot of the people out there, and I get it, it's actually quite interesting how emotional this topic gets. Because certainly there's a lot of people out there that think Bitcoin's a bubble, it's not based on anything real. To which my response is, the dollar isn't based on anything real. I mean, and even taking it a step further, I have to acknowledge as an advocate of silver, well, okay, yeah, I think there's a lot of things that mitigate that in silver. There's the huge industrial demand, yet still it's a piece of metal. It's the value that we assign to it or that society assigns to it. So what actually is intrinsic value? I mean, you're still counting on someone else to value the bar of gold or the gold coin or the silver coin if you want to trade it. So there's always, anything that you're trading has some sort of intrinsic value or not, depending on how you define it. But just the idea that people are saying, well, it has no value because it's a code, or again, keep in mind, look at what we use every day. These printed pieces of paper that, if you really want to talk about something that has no value, I mean, I guess where I started from was, I'm open to different arguments about Bitcoins, although simply put, would I rather be holding Bitcoins or dollars? Whenever a lot of these events that we talk about of the debt and the printing start to be reflected, certainly I'd rather hold the Bitcoin, because at least the dollar, it's, to me, is very clear. You have a bunch of bankers that print as much as they want. There's no backing. It's is what it is. So that's one way of looking at it. And again, just another thing that I've noticed is a lot of the people that talk about Bitcoin and the cryptos being a bubble, I have found, you may have a different experience. So always write in the comments, and it's actually been learning a lot of good stuff from the comments, which is helpful. But I've found that usually the people who are anti-Bitcoin and are saying about how it's in a bubble generally do not really understand or use Bitcoin or have the same knowledge base that when I talk to a couple friends I have that are more on the programming and coding side and really involved in the community and seeing merchants growing who are accepting it as payment. Again, with a lot of the other cryptos, it's not just the monetary component, but are providing different value applications. So again, to say even Bitcoin or cryptos, there's, other things out there. So, maybe perhaps we'll call step one, talk to people who are actually using it. If someone's saying it's a bubble, but they've never actually used it, again, I would just factor that in. So, number two here, I guess it depends a lot on your view of the current currency situation. Again, my perspective, back as far as 2009, 10, 11, 12, I continue to believe, as I think more about what happened during the summer of 2011 following Ben Bernanke's QE2 and seeing the metals go insane, trading to all new all-time highs to trade substantially lower based on now what has been confirmed from the transcripts released in the Deutsche Bank precious metals manipulation case. We know now there are records that the metals didn't just drop because nobody wanted them. The bankers came in and wrote insane amounts of paper contracts to manipulate the price lower. It's no longer gray area. So, really since then, I've been proceeding. I wonder if that could have been, if we were on the verge of seeing the dollar really fracture back then, maybe the manipulation has held it up for 5 or 6 years longer. None of the fundamentals have changed. So could the dollar remain in its current reserve status role longer? Sure. But if you think we're reaching some sort of break point where at some point the printing, like every other time in history, unravels and the dollar faces the same fate as every other paper currency in history, if you think we're in that sort of scenario, which again is my opinion, if you have a market chaos and the dollar is losing value by the hour, certainly that's a point in favor of Bitcoin, because something that gold and silver can't do. Bitcoin is already set up as a sort of electronic payment mechanism, as opposed to, again, I think gold and silver are going to do really well. However, if silver goes up to 50 or $100 an ounce and you want to buy a slice of pizza, what do you do? Which is not to say that can't be worked around or invented. Just, again, one advantage of the cryptos is that they're already designed to handle something like this. So certainly if you think the dollar is facing some trouble, then in that case, I would certainly think that would be a big factor, that Bitcoin would have a lot of growth ahead of it. Because on to point number three is how many people really own a Bitcoin. Remember, traditional bubble, we're talking about something where everybody's piling in, everybody's a buyer, there's no sellers, yet I don't know, if you just stood outside downtown and asked people if they own a Bitcoin, are you going to get 1 out of 100, 1 out of 200, 1 out of 500? I can't imagine it's a very large number. Certainly there's a lot of money piling in there lately, and I believe there are some funds or bigger money players that are getting interested in it. But again, when I think of a bubble, I mean, look at the bond market and look at how many people in their retirement or pension funds have treasuries, or the foreign central banks and the Japanese and Chinese that have massive amounts of treasuries, or the stock market where everybody owns stocks. Again, is not to say that Bitcoin can't plummet. I think one thing that you can expect with a fair amount of certainty is that there's going to be some extreme volatility. But again, in terms of a bubble, that's one thing that I haven't heard anyone give me a good answer on yet, of if it really is a bubble, yet very few people actually own it. Again, tying back to if the currency of the rate of failure of the dollar accelerates and we hit a crisis point this year, then in that case, People are getting out of dollars. I think Bitcoin probably even easier to get into. And this is just my own personal view and experience. I find that people seem very overwhelmed about how do I buy gold or silver, where do you actually get it, versus it seems like to the person who's new to all this, they seem to find Bitcoin easier because you can just go online and buy it. Again, whether that's a major factor or not, who knows, but just something that I've noticed. And especially if you have, if you really start to see that break point in the dollar, I think it's going to be harder to find physical gold and silver. So, again, by all means, these are just my opinion, but hopefully giving you a few things to think about. And the last one with some of the cryptos is that, again, there's Bitcoin, but there's also a bunch of other ones that are now, we've talked about Andrew Maguire's bullion coin, so a gold-backed crypto. Last week we talked about Cliff High's interview with Reggie Middleton of Veritasium that addresses infrastructure of a lot of these industries like healthcare or the exchanges and provides actual value. So it's not just, it's a mix of a crypto and a business model. So perhaps if you think maybe you don't like Bitcoin, but you think, oh, well, this is a little bit, this has some of these other ones have the crypto element, but also something of value added that can give it a sense of like a backing, if you will. So are those a bubble? Again, I feel as if the role that the cryptocurrencies will play is growing in a similar sense to the way when the internet came out, it took a while for people to actually understand it and adopt it. And yes, that certainly turned into a bubble. And by all means, the fact that I personally think we're not in a bubble yet doesn't mean that at some point we won't be. I think that's a bit of a ways off. In the same way, at some point, gold and silver might turn into a bubble. Again, seems from the price, with the prices we have today, I would say that's a bit away. But again, at least looking at where we are today and just thinking about a couple of these factors, again, I haven't piled in big. And like in that Jim Rogers interview we talked about a couple weeks ago, I think there's value to investing in what you know. If you look into Bitcoin and it just makes no sense or seems silly, then, there's other stuff to invest in. You don't have to invest in Bitcoin or stocks. And it always concerns me the way the media portrays like you're a heathen if you're not in the stock market bubble or jumping in. But in the end, invest in what you know and what makes sense. Hopefully these have given you a few things to think about. I noticed by the comments on any of the Bitcoin videos and just, all the folks I listen to and the research I do that people get fired up whichever side they're on, which is fine. What I find helpful is to just keep a calm, open mind, listen to what both have to say. There'll be parts you agree with, parts you don't. But then when you start building that framework, then you can really evaluate anything by hearing the different voices, thinking what are the questions that you need to get answered, see how different people approach it. Again, going back to who do you trust, who's been right about things in the past. And you factor all that together, and I think that's a good foundation for making any sort of investment decisions. So hopefully that helped. Leave your comments below, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Thanks.